In this episode, I am once again joined by Lama Glenn Mullin, spiritual teacher, Tibetologist, and author of over 30 books on Buddhism. Glenn discusses the mysterious Kalachakra, Wheel of Time Tantra, explores its history, and uncovers its unique esoteric characteristics. Glenn recounts his own connection to the Kālacakra Tantra, including his memories of the Dalai Lama's first ever public Kalachakra empowerment, given to hundreds of thousands of people in Bodhgaya, and discusses the surprising pros and cons of mass public initiations. Glenn reveals the subtle body yogas of the Kalachakra, compares its methods to other highest yoga tantras, such as Cakrasaṃvara and Guhyasamāja, and considers the Kalachakra prophecies of Śambhala and a coming age of darkness over the world. So without further ado, Lama Glenn Mullin. Lama Glenn Mullin, welcome back to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much. Very great honor and pleasure to be part of the Guru Viking inspirational force sweeping the planet.
That's what that breeze is, an inspirational force. I wondered what it was.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. It's such a delight to speak with you again. And today I noticed, we were just discussing before we began, I noticed that you began a Kalachakra teaching, 12-week online course on the Kalachakra. And I thought, gosh, wouldn't it be interesting for us to discuss the Kalachakra? It's an extremely famous highest yoga tantra system, famous, I think, because of the Dalai Lamas, the 14th Dalai Lama's mass empowerments that have occurred over the last decades in public and have drawn a lot of attention to the system. And it's in fact a very interesting and unique system. So I thought, wouldn't it be great to discuss that? And you wrote a book also, The Practice of Kalachakra, published in the 80s and then revised again in 1991. A fascinating book too. So perhaps we would start with your own background with the Kalachakra. You write in the book, I had my first real encounter with the Kalachakra Tantric tradition in the winter of late 1973. His Holiness the Dalai Lama was to give a public Kalachakra initiation, and I planned to attend. At the time the initiation was announced, I was living and studying in Dharamsala, India. The wave of excitement that ran through the Tibetan community was almost tangible. The site of the initiation was to be Bodhgaya, a sleepy little temple village a few miles south of the city of Gaya, Bihar. And you described it as a fantastic, mystical, tantric party that continued day and night for 2 weeks. So I'm very curious about that. Could you tell the story of your first encounter with the Kalachakra?
My Buddhist training started by reading books in my teen years and continued. After college, I went to England, and while in England, to meet my mom's side of the family. She was British war bride, and I heard that the Dalai Lama, now a refugee in India with many other lamas who had fled the Chinese invasion, that the Dalai Lama was opening a school for Western people to train Western people in Buddhist enlightenment technology. So I saved my shekels, or should I say quids? Quids, my pounds, living in England. And the next spring traveled overland and went to Dharamsala, met with Dalai Lama, got details on the training system and entered into it. Loved the Dalai Lama, loved the Dalai Lama's two great gurus, Ling Rinpoche, Trijang Rinpoche. And the Dalai Lama had appointed two great geshes, both of whom had recently completed 3 and 5 year retreats, very accomplished, very learned, and very well practiced, to teach to us. So I joined that program. And about a year later, it was announced that the Dalai Lama would be giving the Kalachakra empowerment in Bodhgaya. So this was the first time the Dalai Lama, as a refugee in India, was going to do any major activity. He had visited Bodhgaya a number of times and done small little blessings, but this was going to be a 2-week festival with 5 or 6 day teaching, and then heads of all schools of Tibetan Buddhism who had made it out into exile coming to attend and do little events. They had no idea how many people to expect because, there were about 100,000 Tibetan refugees in India scattered all over the country and Nepal, and maybe a few thousand in Nepal and Bhutan. But over 350,000 people showed up in this little town, which probably had maximum 200 or 300 rooms. There was like a government guest house, and the temples had a dozen or so rooms in 10 different temples. And so this tent city just sprang up very amazingly. And around the tent city were like tents with little cafe restaurants selling Tibetan momos and noodle soups, and some Nepali and Indian restaurants with rice and lentils and so on. And that was, for me, this was my second visit to Bodhgaya. The previous year I had visited Ling Rinpoche, who became my main sort of initiation teacher and sort of practice mentor, you could say. I'd given Yamataka, but Yamataka initiation there and quite a long teaching. But at that time, maybe there were 3,000 or 4,000 people came to Bodhgaya to come in and see 350,000 people in the middle of quite a dusty, remote place. And of course, Bodhgaya was the enlightenment place of the Buddha. So the Dalai Lama giving the initiation there was very, very exciting. Half of Bhutan emptied for it, and half of every Himalayan kingdom, Lahul, Spiti, Kannur, Ladakh, all of North Nepal, from all the Sharpa regions and Mustang and so on. So just every Himalayan Buddhist who could send someone there sent them. And it was very, very powerful, very exciting. And wonderful to see the collection of the great lamas from all the different schools. Kala Rinpoche came to assist, and Gyalpo Khyentse Rinpoche came to assist. Sakya and Rinpoche from Sakyas came to assist. The great Bampo master Tenzin Nyangdakla came to, and Khenpo Tenzin Nyangdak came to assist. So the heads of all the different schools were there very, very amazingly. And the Dalai Lama taught for maybe a week or 5 or 6 days. And he had each of the heads of each of the schools do something. And then he gave the Dukor Wangchen, the great initiation, Dukor Dujugbe Wang. They made the big San Mandala, took about 10 days to make that, and being careful whenever a breeze came up. But it was very, very fabulous. And it was very much a kind of a Coney Island of the mind kind of experience, to use Lawrence Ferlinghetti poetry, book of poems title, a kind of a Coney Island of the mind, because people set up like little merry-go-rounds and Ferris wheels for parents to do with their little kids and stuff like that, to keep them active and out of trouble between all of the teachings and initiations going on. And of course, I had read about Kalachakra before, because my mom had been a member of the Theosophical Society with Madame Blavatsky, and the Blavatskyites and the Theosophists were very, very enthusiastic about Śambhala. She had been a Russian mystic and connected to Tibetan Buddhism through the Mongolian connection, you could say, because much of East Russia, the Buryat region, and Tuva, Siberia, has large sections, and Kalmykia in the West, a lot of, at that time, prior to the communist destructions of Stalin, many Buddhist temples. And of course, they kept their own sort of headquarters in Petersburg, the capital city for the Tsars at the time. So she was aware of Śambhala, and she was one of the first people to write about Kalachakra, Śambhala prophecies. And so I had read about that in my teen years. And was very exciting to have the possibility of actually entering into that mandala, being introduced into the mandala by the Dalai Lama, even if I am like one flea and a dog with 350,000 fleas. But it was very, very beautiful. And Dalai Lama was, as always, of course, magnificent in his teaching, lead-in teaching, and throughout the ceremony.
You're right about that time. The spiritual energy rose from the earth in waves, like heat on a distant horizon. Sleep became pervaded by dreams so vivid, it became difficult to separate waking from dream experiences. So in previous episodes, we've discussed your Yamantaka initiation and the dreams that you had around after that and during that process. What sort of experiences were you having during the Kalachakra initiation?
Well, Bodhgaya, being the place not only of Buddhist enlightenment, but prophesied as the seat of the Vajra asana, the Vajra seat, where many, many beings over the centuries and millenniums achieve enlightenment. So it really has a very, very special energy, very wonderful energy. And for me, the first time I went there, which is a year earlier, it just amazed me that the feeling of walking, but feeling you were 2 or 3 inches off the ground as though you had zero gravity. And it was just kind of a little bubble. You're floating around like a little wisp of smoke or energy or a holographic image or something like that. And it was the same for Bodhgaya. And certainly many, many very powerful dreams, not as powerful as I had in terms of enlightenment as Yamantaka, because during my Yamantaka initiation from Ling Rinpoche, I just kept dreaming of the mandala all night, on the night between the Tagun and the Mushi, between the setting up the stage and then the actual empowerment. There was just wave after wave of Yamantaka mandalas floating into me until in I dreamed I achieved enlightenment. I mean, I actually felt I achieved enlightenment, but then I woke up in my dream and I wasn't enlightened, but I was definitely very moved and very inspired. So I didn't have dreams quite that strong with Kalachakra, perhaps because 350,000 people there. There was always someone coughing and farting, because all the tents you had like maybe 10, 12 beds in every tent. They're sort of army style. The army had basically lent those army style tents to set everything up. And the Indian Army, of course, was very honored to learn that the Dalai Lama was giving this initiation. And they asked for permission to do, with the Air Force, to do overhead flying and to drop buckets of marigold flowers from 1,000, 2,000 feet up in the air. They didn't want clumps of them landing on someone's head, knocking them unconscious. And so dreams weren't quite as dramatic as after Yamantaka because of the crowded quarters, you could say, but they were still very, very uplifting and radiant and joyous, very prophetic, I would say. So for me, the chance to be there was just very, very overwhelming in my mind, because I had been reading about the Kalachakra Tantra, the prophecies of the Kalachakra Tantra, the Śambhala, and the whole unfolding lotus of the Enlightenment tradition on planet Earth as spoken of in the Kalachakra Tantra.
Why was it that the Dalai Lama decided to give mass Kalachakra empowerments? Typically, these sorts of procedures are thought of anyway to be a private, small group or one-to-one kind of affair, tantric initiation and so on. Why did he decide to do mass empowerments?
Well, every empowerment has its own kind of tradition in history, historical tradition, you could say. And Kalachakra is one of those which, when it's given, is often given to larger groups. And the logic for that is because outer, inner, secret Kalachakra. Outer Kalachakra refers to the whole cosmos, the moving stars and the sun and the moon and all of this sort of thing. The sort of astrological situation in which we humanoids find ourselves, with cosmic energies everywhere coming from every direction of the heavens. So outer Kalachakra refers to the cosmological environment, you could say. And inner Kalachakra refers to all of the living beings and their bases as living beings. In other words, the sensory powers and objects of the senses and receptors and the channels and chakras of the body and all this kind of thing. And then alternative Kalachakra, these are Chi, Nong, Shen in Tibetan, other Kalachakra, but usually translated as alternative because outer, inter, other sounds a little bit funny. And referring to the actual meditations, yogas, which are used to purify the obscurations that obstruct joyfully, lucidly, and knowingly experiencing outer Kalachakra and inner Kalachakra. In other words, all of our obstructions in how we perceive the outer world. The alternate Kalachakra is to purify, so that when we look out, we are, if you're in a good mood, the world looks good. And what is it? When it's shining, the whole world, when you're smiling, the whole world smiles with you. And when it's raining, you bring on the rain, or something like that. When you're frowning, you bring on the rain. So it's sort of that way our inner life, our mind, and our state of being, emotionally, intellectually, conceptually, totally distorts outer Kalachakra and inner Kalachakra. So alternate Kalachakra here referring to how outer and inner, the obscurations that distort the perception of them as joyous, lucid, enlightenment activities are removed. So in that everyone lives in this cosmos, therefore everyone can benefit from Kalachakra. Everyone has a stronger karma with Kalachakra, karmic connection with Kalachakra, than with many of the other tantric traditions. And therefore, giving Kalachakra empowerment in public can benefit everyone to some extent. Whereas many of the other tantric traditions like Yamataka, Cakrasaṃvara, Vajrayogini, Vajra, these are exclusively practice traditions for people having strong karmic connections with those specific traditions. So, I remember one of the texts I included in this book of mine was, I think it was in early 1980s or mid 1980s. The Dalai Lama was going to give Kalachakra initiation in Madison, Wisconsin, and he had written a short treatise, maybe 20 pages, on preparing to receive it. In other words, a general what you should know if you want to come to the initiation. That's one of the things he discusses, that generally many of the initiations we don't give in large groups. In Kalachakra, we can give in large groups, and it has a history of that. So if we go back through history, the previous Panchen Lama gave it in Beijing to a huge, huge, huge group. And then in Mongolia, it was given quite a few times to huge groups. In Tibet, because Tibet, of course, was not so populous a country, but it was given in large groups by Ngawang Choden, the guru of the seventh Dalai Lama, by the seventh Dalai Lama himself, by various Panchen Lamas over those 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. So there is that sort of basis on it being given for large groups. Many of the others, tantras, when you take those initiations, you get samya, or practice commitments. You should do a long sadhana or a short sadhana or a 6-session guru yoga. During one of the empowerment stages of the vows has, I think it's got 6 general ones and then 5 appendages. One of the 5 appendages is you sort of commit to doing so many of the mantra practices or such and such a daily meditation on the practice system. And often that's quite substantial. But Kalachakra isn't. You can just say, I'll do one a day, and that's enough. And so because that itself suffices because of the strength of your karmic connection to this cosmos. And yeah, that's one of the reasons I think it's given openly. The second reason it's often given more openly is because of prophecy. A lot of the Buddhist prophecies come out of Kalachakra Tantra. And those include this 2,500 years after my death, my Dharma will go to the land of the white people who turn red when they drink alcohol or get angry. And, well, the land of the red-faced people. And that also is stated in the Laṅkāvatāra Sūtra. So it's a famous sutra from this quote that came into the Laṅkāvatāra Sutra. Many people think it came to the Laṅkāvatāra Sutra from the Kalachakra, because before Kalachakra comes to India, we don't see that prophecy in earlier editions of Laṅkāvatāra. So we could say it's something that crept into Laṅkāvatāra Sutra from Kalachakra Tantra. And the other thing is prophecies of cycles and how in the not too distant future, we're going to enter into 1,000 years of darkness or 1,000 years of light. And at that time, it'll be like 49 and a half on the 2 sides, light and darkness. And there'll be 1% in the middle. And the 1% in the middle are associated with Śambhala, a joya, the great land of pure joy. And things could go either way. And at that time, if the land of pure joy, Śambhala, is strong, that 1% will swing it. And we'll have 1,000 years of golden age. And anyone who received, the rumor began, I think the rumor began, maybe 150 years ago with mass colonialism and all of this kind of dark forces sort of pushing things in the way of the greedy, you could say. That idea became much stronger. And anyone who receives the Kalachakra initiation will be reborn amongst that 1% of the ones who will swing the world toward light. It's kind of a mysterious prophecy, you could say, but a very hopeful one. And, living today, we can very see it. I mean, we have almost no democracy left on planet Earth. It's all basically now, of course, people are free to vote for who they like, but of course, you can only vote for who you know about and what's said about them. And the 1 or 2% own all of the media, so then they get to say what they like about who they like. And whoever spends the most money on their elections tends to get more success. Famous example was Obama running against McCain, I think it was, and they both did a handshake on TV that they would both limit to $675 million spending on each of their campaigns. And because McCain, as a senator, had pushed for limits on campaign. And of course, McCain ran out of his and Obama ran through his. But there's still 2 months to go before the election. So quickly, the Democrats threw in another $500 million or $750 million. And we say money doesn't swing elections, but it does to a certain extent. Advertising does produce some results. So, we see quirky events like that in democracy. And I would say I'm glad Obama won that election, because I think he is a much better man than McCain in my own view, but that's a different issue. It wasn't really won fair and square, put it like that. But nonetheless, the best man did win. Maybe Obama had been a hockey player, where it says, if you don't cheat a little bit, you don't win. So that aspect of Kalachakra plays a role, I think. Every human being, man, woman, and child, wants to be a hero. The idea of saving the universe from 1,000 years of darkness, or saving planet Earth from 1,000 years of darkness, is quite appealing to many people. And you don't have to do a lot. Show up for empowerment, make that karmic connection, and do a few mantras daily. And you're headed to push the world 1% more toward the 1,000 years of light.
I wonder if we might talk a bit about the context of Kalachakra and how it fits into the broader picture of Indian and Himalayan spirituality and religion. You write in the book here that Central Asian literature is extremely rich in Kalachakra materials. Some thousands, if not tens of thousands, of titles exist in the Tibetan language. And later on you say the Kalachakra tradition emerged publicly in India considerably later than did the various systems of the 3 lower Tantra classes, and also later than the 3 mainstream Tantras. Thus, in a sense, it has from the time of its appearance presumed knowledge of these, and is a final refinement of them. So I'm wondering if you might contextualize Kalachakra in the broader picture of Indian and Himalayan spirituality.
Yeah, because Buddha traveled and taught for 45 years, and he traveled vast regions. And not only did he travel and teach in far-flung places, people's traveled from far away to attend, because he basically set up a tour he did every year, that walking through the 8 great kingdoms of what we call Magadha, which is north central India. And as this sort of news of this great teacher spread, people would think, oh, that's a nice thing to do. I'll go and walk with the Buddha for a few months next year. Or 10 years from now, when my kids are a little older, I'll do that. And so we have that kind of tradition in the Buddhist world, where he travels and teaches a lot. And according to literature now, the king of tantras, Guhyasamāja, is publicly taught to King Indrabhuti in India. And so it's right from the beginning is a Central Indian teaching of the Buddha. It gets taught and practiced in Central India. In fact, Bodhgaya has an old stone carving of the Guhyasamāja mandala from very early period. And so those tantras became very well known in Central India. The speciality of Kalachakra is said that King Suchandra traveled from the far north, probably from what is Khotan in today's world. Khotan, pronounced KH, always in Mongolian, pronounced like almost a Dutch sound, isn't it? Traveled from Śambhala, which was probably Khotan, north of Tibet, on the middle of the Gobi Desert between east-west Tibet, probably, I don't know, some hundreds of miles east of Afghanistan, you could say, in Bamiyan. And he traveled by record and by legend, or by legendary record, traveled with 96. So at that time, Śambhala had 96 states or provinces within it. So, and he had heard of the Buddha and was very moved by what he heard and thought, oh yes, I would like to receive some teaching from the Buddha. And he traveled down, received Kalachakra with 96 of his the heads of the 96 states, we could say. These are often depicted in Kalachakra and Śambhala paintings in a very sort of cartoonish way, I should add, but I think Tibetans could get a royalty on Marvel comic books and the cartoon stylizations. And he traveled down and met with the Buddha and requested a teaching that would be appropriate to Śambhala. And so Buddha taught the Kalachakra Tantra to him and his group. And of course, some Indians participated, but after the teaching, King Suchandra and his group left and returned to Khotan or to Śambhala. And then in India, the Guhyasamāja caught everyone's fancy, and Cakrasaṃvara became very, very popular. And so you could say the Kalachakra was never widely populated in north central India, amongst at least the aristocracy. And those lineages which were not state-sponsored had some kind of limitation, you could say, in their success and their survival. And then later, those lineages traveled back. Some Indian masters went up to Khotan and Śambhala and gathered those lineages and brought them back to India. So in a way, they spread much later in India than other tantras. Now, some texts say that Kalachakra was the first tantra taught by the Buddha, that he taught it at the same time he taught the Prajnaparamita sutras on Rajagriha. And although it was the first tantra taught by Buddha, it was the last to be widely popularized. As you probably know, with many of the wisdom teachings of the Buddha and tantric teachings of the Buddha, they were all kind of, what is we call time capsules? And people bury things in the earth with something from 1973, not to open it till 1983, and they take it out and have a kind of, wow, I was doing that in 1973 kind of thing. So a lot of the tantras were taught as kind of time capsules. At a certain time when the world is ready, this teaching can be given. At another time, this can be given. Now, Christ would have benefited. Now, we're just finishing Easter up here in Canada, so Christ would have benefited from that time capsule idea because he only got to teach for 4 years. And then he was crucified. And had he had more of a time capsule idea, he might have lived longer and avoided crucifixion. But I think we see a similar thing happening in Nyingma and in Bonpo, don't we? Where we have time capsule lineages that become known as terma or treasure revelations, you could say. And often they're accredited to Guru Rinpoche, and this won't be useful for another 1,000 years, and this will be used for another 1,500 years, that sort of thing. And they're passed in kind of a mystical way, either with small groups of humans, sort of little, I don't know if we could use the word coven, but a little sangha, let's use the word sangha, a Vajra sangha, who passes them quietly until the prophesied time of their usefulness arises. So many of the Buddhist tantras were taught like that. And Guhyasamāja was the first to be widely propagated or widely spread amongst highest yoga tantras. I think before Guhyasamāja, other Kriya Tantras like Taras and Chenrezis, Manjusris and such, these were widely taught. The highest Yoga Tantra, because it has such sexy imagery, sexual imagery, and also meat and alcohol as substances of spiritual significance. And in Brahmin India, the Brahmins being vegetarian think everyone should be vegetarian, and somehow they think that vegetables are more spiritual than a hamburger. And so because the Tantrikas never accepted those kind of, especially highest Yoga Tantra, and similarly with alcohol, Brahmins and the restrictions on alcohol. So, and the restrictions on sexuality. So Tantra sexuality is fully explored for its spiritual potential, as is diet and other kinds of materials like alcohol, which we can't really call it psychotropic, but for some people it is slightly psychotropic. And one of the reasons for the secrecy was because of that. Once it got into the Himalayas, which were cross-fertilized with the shamanic traditions, it was much more readily accepted, and it traveled into Tibet, which also had a great history in shamanic practice, and up into Mongolia, which had also had a long history of shamanic practice. Naturally, it was much more received than by the sort of what you call straight-laced, tight-assed Brahmins of India. I better say a mantra quickly so I don't get cursed by the Brahmins. But because of that, the Tantras tended to be released in times and places where the very strict Brahmanic culture did not hold such sway, you could say. And so we'd say often later ways of categorizing tantras, we have to say later ways of categorizing. So we see later Indians from 8th, 9th, 10th century dividing the tantric teachings of Buddha into 4 classes: Kriya, Charya, Yoga, highest Yoga Tantra. Now, I don't think Buddha originally said anything like that. Not that I've come across. And so then later, you could say, compilers of tantric lineages put in those kind of ways. Then they looked at the highest Yoga Tantras, and the 3 main ones was Guhyasamāja, Cakrasaṃvara, and Yamantaka. Hevajra, what else is there? Hevajra, Hayagriva. Those were all classified as Begyu, hidden meaning tantras, because their words were often pretty wild and rarely meaning what they said. And therefore it came, one of the commentaries to Guhyasamāja says, every syllable can be interpreted in 6 ways. And it's written in this hidden language so that the uninitiated won't have a clue what it's talking about. The Dalai Lama, when discussing that one said, well, in the Guhyasamāja Tantra, it said, kill father, kill mother, without that, no enlightenment. Then he went through the 6 ways of interpreting that. Your father is your anger, mother is attachment, the nesting instinct. You have to get above ordinary, hereditary likes and dislikes. You have to go beyond your birth heritage to achieve enlightenment. You have to step beyond the cultural mores and world vision of the village in which you were born. So someone reads that, kill mother, kill father, sounds pretty dramatic. And of course, that gets to be 5 more layers of interpretation. So it's called Begyu because the words are very hidden. Whereas Kalachakra is a Selgyu, a direct meaning Tantra. And I won't say much more on its direct meaning because it's so direct it requires no further statement.
How does Kalachakra compare to the other highest yoga tantras in terms of practice and that side of things? Of course, it has many, as you mentioned before, lots of content in there, cosmology, subtle body aspects and channels, etc., as you described before. But in terms of the practice, it has yidam practice, completion stage practices. It has...
Yeah, so we could say all highest yoga tantra has generation stage, which means mandala practice, which sometimes when it's written as a daily practice liturgy is called a dakye, transforming sense of self as ordinary into sense of self as the yidam, the main deity in the mandala. Dak means self, kye means self-arising. What does that mean? Self-arising. My ordinary sense of I'm Glenn Mullin from Gaspé, Quebec, an Anglophone in a sea of Frenchmen. And transform and going into emptiness and coming out in stages until I'm a fully enlightened Buddha Kalachakra, or Buddha Yamataka, or Buddha Cakrasaṃvara, Buddha Guhyasamāja. So that dakye generation stage is the same in that one dissolves one's ordinary sense of self and then comes out of that ordinary sense of self in a particular way. And arises as a mandala deity and transforms one's sense of the outer world into mandala and the beings in that outer world into dakas, dakinis, and so on. So the generation stage holds those basic core elements or foundations in common. The stages and process is a little bit different. So for instance, in Kalachakra, when we get the initiation, we get what's called the 7 initiations of entering like a child basically coming into the world, 7 stages of youthful growth, you could say. We don't see that in the other tantras. In the other tantras, you go into emptiness, and we say taking the clear light of death. You imagine you're dying and being reborn, basically. Goodbye, cruel world. Bye-bye, into emptiness, clear light of moment of death. And that is our original mind, deepest radiance of the soul, our eternal quality of radiant presence, something like that, you could say. A little bit like Ranching Relationship, a little bit like our natural Buddha nature, something like that. But rather than identifying it as a seed of enlightenment, identifying it as something already enlightened, an enlightenment quality that we already have, but sometimes we just don't notice and therefore act like dummies or idiots. If we could connect to that, that's our native intelligence, and everything we would do would be natively intelligent. When we lose sight of that, we're angry, we punch someone in the nose, we're attached, we steal something, whatever. We want to deceive some pretty girl into liking us, we say, well, I'm really descended from Eric the Red. Royal blood flows through my veins. But so we just can, in the highest yoga tantra, like the big hidden ones, we go through taking 3 kayas as a path in the generation stage. We come out of that emptiness as in a Sambhoga kaya, a sort of blissful form body, you could say, simple, joyful, blissful, everything is complete form. That's like taking Bardo as the Sambhogakaya of a Buddha. And then we go through a process and are reborn as Nirmanakaya. And that's taking rebirth as the path of Nirmanakaya. So they beg you, to the best of my knowledge, all of them, there may be one or two which don't do that, of which I am uninformed. Or some idiot in the past has misclassified them. I am right and they are wrong. So they all go through that. And then when we are arisen as the Lord of the Mandala, or that's a Dakini practice, Vajrayini, the Queen of the Mandala, then we do mantras and send out Buddha action, bringing peace, pacifying negativity, increasing goodness, subduing harmful forces, and eradicating or totally smashing to smithereens the totally misguided. So the general hidden tantras all have that three, taking three kayas, followed by the fourth of Buddha action or Buddha activity through mantra practice. And the Kalachakra doesn't have quite the same, whether it has those 7 steps of entering like a child and then transforming and so on. So it doesn't talk about Kusum Lamkar taking 3 kayas as a path. Now, later commentators like a Geshe, I received the Kalachakra teaching from way back in 1975 or 76 or something. He said, if you look at the process, you can see how it's parallel to Kusum Lamkar taking 3 kayas as a path. But the wording is quite different, and the stages and the structures quite different. So that's the case there. Now, from the point of view of completion stage, generally completion stage that has Tumo as the basis in all the hidden meaning tantras, then illusory physicality and clear light as the main body of the completion stage practice. And then Yuganada, the great union of clear light and illusory body. The Yuganada, great union of training, of a trainee, and the great union beyond training. So again, Kalachakra doesn't use that exact terminology, or that, let's not say that exact terminology, does not use that terminology and that structure in its discussion of completion stage. And if you want to know what terminology it uses, you should buy a copy of my book. 3 copies, read it 3 times, because you may not get it on the first read. But anyway, yes, the completion stage is quite different language, but we could say the basic structure is the same. You're doing chakra and nadi practice. What we could say is Tumo, and there's a sense of the energy side and the radiant side, which is really what illusory body clear light is about, but it's using quite a different language and quite a somewhat different approach to the process.
And does it have the usual features, Tumo and that sort of thing, that one would expect to find in the completion stage practices of a highest yoga tantra?
Well, all highest yoga tantra have chakra, nadi. Tibetans use the word salung tigle. And the nice thing about salung tigle is sa means either channels, or sa could mean sakor chakras. Tigle means drops. Now that term salung tigle can apply to both hidden tantras and direct meaning tantras, or direct clarity. Begyu and Selgyu can be used to either. So yes, we can say there certainly is Tumo there. And there's something like the illusory body, although here they use the word sugtong, dematerializing the total sense of your physicality. Tongzuk, empty body. And it's got to do with the 21,600 breaths. And strangely, a lot of, so this is a popular number throughout India. Most humans take 21,600 breaths a day. It's the kind of universal average for humans on birth. I'm sure humans on Earth. I'm sure, if you're climbing Mount Everest above 20,000 feet, you might be taking a few more. or if you're running a marathon, perhaps a few more, but in general. And so the breath control is connected to the crystallization of what we are materially. And so rather than illusory body, and the illusory body becoming rainbow body, which is the language of all of the Baigyu hidden meaning tantras, here we don't say illusory body becomes rainbow body. Now, sometimes in Nyingma literature, we say, oh, Dzogchen is rainbow body, but not at all. Not at all exclusively so. Every highest Yoga Tantra that is in the classification of Baigyu as illusory physicality becoming the attainment of rainbow body. So Kalachakra not using illusory body as a technical term for our physical side of being, the physical side of our life, the sense of body, material of the life, uses Zug and Zug tongue, empty body. And otherwise, the breathing, sitting in the Vajrapastra, doing vows breathing, all this is very, very similar. Just structured slightly more, should we say, eloquently. King Suchandra was very eloquent. And sometimes people say Cakrasaṃvara is a little more sexy than most of the other tantras, because King Suchandra said, I like this stuff you teach on enlightenment. I'd like to do it, but I have 500 wives, and the only time I have to meditate is when I'm making love to my wives. And otherwise, I have 500 wives, running a kingdom, running a whole justice system. In those days, a king was also a kind of a judge for important cases. If I just sit down and meditate, everything will fall apart. I'll have 500 angry wives, a military system defending our country falling apart at the seams, and a justice system in which the innocent are being unjustly convicted. So the only time I have to meditate is when I'm making love. When Dalai Lama gave us the empowerment in 1973-74 at Christmas, New Year time, Lama Yeshe told that story to a group of a couple of hundred Westerners who had come for that empowerment. And I'd never heard that legend before of why Suchandra traveled so far to get that teaching from Buddha. I guess his wives had said, get cracking. You get down there and learn those secrets, Mr. King, or you're not going to be a king much longer. We'll yeah, so that story is told about King Suchandra and the speciality of the practice of Kalachakra. So it's slightly more sexy, slightly more sensual than the general female tantras. But of course, every highest yoga tantra uses sexuality as one of its tools in the enlightenment practice, just not so overtly as in the Kalachakra.
Very interesting indeed. Thank you. And perhaps one last question then on Kalachakra. You mentioned before the interest in Kalachakra and Śambhala, Madame Blavatsky, and the Theosophical Society and so on. And they had, of course, great interest in Indian religion and the esoteric. However, as time has gone by, more and more has become known and investigated about those religious systems and texts and so on than was available to the Theosophists at the time that they were operating at their height. And so sometimes things that they initially thought, well, we've learned more, to the contrary or different. How did they view Śambhala, and what's the shortfall of their understanding about Śambhala compared to what we know today, particularly related to the Kalachakra?
Well, I mean, one problem is in that time, 150 years ago, when Blavatsky and Olcott and these people were working, the only thing known about Kalachakra was from little quotations here and there, heard by British travelers in Himalayan India, hearing statements made by Tibetan lamas. And of course, back in Russia, during Tsarist time, before Stalin destroyed Buddhism and whatnot in Buryat and Kalmukya, Tuva, Siberia, then traveling lamas. So they would hear talk about it. And the first temple built, the first Buddhist temple built in the West is probably the so-called Kalachakra temple built in St. Petersburg by Ngawang Dorje, the 13th Dalai Lama's, one of his 7 senchobs, or 7 scriptural tutors, I guess you would say. And he was the head Lama of Buryat, and the Tsar gave a piece of land and gave permission to build a Buddhist temple there for Buryats. Became known as the Kalachakra temple. In fact, it's not a Kalachakra temple, but Senchob Dorje, Ngawang Dorje, he was a great Kalachakra practitioner. And because Kalachakra Suchandra is supposed to have come from the north, in other words, we could say southwest Mongolia, the Mongolians have always felt a special connection with Kalachakra from ancient times. Some of the best commentaries to Kalachakra Tantra, Kalachakra practice are written by the Mongolian lamas. We may not know they're Mongolian if you look at them in, say, the Tibetan Buddhist Research Center's database, because they will have a Tibetan name because they received their ordination as a monk from a Tibetan Lama, probably in Tibet, and when they were sent there as a young monk or young nun to study, and they'll be given the name Ngawang Tashi, like Senchob Ngawang Dorje. Now, Mongolians can't say Ngawang, so they call him Agwan Dorje, with Mongolian script being rewritten into Cyrillic in 1941, and the Russian Cyrillic not being able to say Nga, it becomes Ag. And Dorje, you can't have an E at the end like the A at the end in Russian, so it becomes Agwan Dorje. But the Mongols had always been very, very interested in Kalachakra. And so it was well known around such Russian circles. And some of those early great Russian Buddhist scholars coming out of the Oriental Institute in St. Petersburg and later in Moscow. Some of the earliest translations of Tibetan Buddhist texts, including like Chandrakirti and Abhidharma, these sort of great Tibetan texts, were coming out of Russia. It was really the first Western school of Tibetology, long before England had a school of Tibetology, because British interest in Buddhism largely came from Sri Lanka and then was largely centered around the Hindu world, and sort of took an interest in Tibet really later on, really with the Dalai Lama coming to India in, what was it, 1909, I think, or something like that. And then Britain taking more of an interest in things Tibetan, falling in love with Tibet, and then Oxford, Cambridge, so take up more serious studies. So she had heard a lot from Mongolian lamas in St. Petersburg. These things were published. Nicholas Roerich, by the way, one of the great Russian early theosophists, although he first became a theosophist in America, because under the Tsar, the Theosophical Society was not allowed to register, blocked by the Russian Orthodox Church. And then, of course, once communism came in, it was banned, as was almost everything. But nonetheless, you had all these great scholars of Buryati Buddhism, in other words, Lama Buddhism and Kalmukyan Buddhism, living in St. Petersburg and Moscow and the various universities. And so what they heard, you could say, was, in general, there was no, I think, translation of Kalachakra practice material into Russian languages at that time. But as Roerich writes, I think 1904, he was asked to be on the directing committee for building that first Lama temple in the West, in St. Petersburg. So he actually designed stained glass windows for the top floor with 8 auspicious emblems. And he writes, I first heard of Śambhala and Kalachakra from the great Mongolian Lama, Agwang Dorje, the guru of the 13th Dalai Lama. And so, they didn't have an intellectual study, nor did they have sadhana practice study, nor completion stage yoga study. It seems like Blavatsky never learned Kundalini from India. That came into Theosophical society a little bit later. And Alice Bailey became very strong on it, and what's called Annie Besant. These people became much stronger, and then basically after Blavatsky, I think the Theosophical Society became a little more on the Hindu side. And then Annie Besant found Krishnamurti and sort of thought he might be the next sort of great inspirational force in the Theosophical Society. But it didn't really work out that way, and he really became more of an independent teacher, writer, whatever. So their study of Kalachakra never went very deep like that. And I think their main benefit to world civilization, we could say that Blavatsky was really the first one to say that every spiritual tradition has something interesting to say. There's no such thing as we Christians have the door to salvation, and everyone who doesn't become a Christian is going to hell in a handbasket. And of course, she grew up in a Russia in which the Russian Orthodox Church was as strict as the Catholic Church in Europe 100 years, 200, 300 years earlier, and as strict as some of the Christian churches in America, with Salem, with the witch hunts and burning. They killed quite a few people just in Massachusetts, and just since that new little baby of a country, the USA, was born. So she grew up in that kind of environment with that kind of, what would you say, sort of racist, snobby, Europeans are great and everyone else is in the sticks kind of thing. And the best anyone else can do is listen to us and follow our religion and follow our philosophy, and they'll all do much better. And I think the greatest thing she did was crack that glass ceiling and say everyone's got something interesting to say, and the more we hear from everyone, the better off we're all going to be. And those come into her first sort of 7 statement platforms, that truth is not the domain of any race, religion, place, or peoples. And in that way, it did open a lot of doors. And then it influenced many, many great people, including presidents and prime ministers, and kings and princes, and so on around the world, and brought about a wonderful opening, I think, of Western culture. And that was a relief for traditional non-Western cultures like India, where, there'd been a great effort to make them all Christians. North America, you pick up all the kids of the native peoples and put them in mission schools and don't allow them to speak their own mother tongue for 20 years and make them go to church on Sunday and memorize the Bible. It was a very silly world she was born into, and she improved it a lot. She brought great change in it through her popularity. And of course, she was a little bit eccentric, and like many eccentric people, went a little over the top. And so then she became ridiculed for a thing, not for what she accomplished, but for where she went over the top. And her idea of clairvoyance is like radio signals, and you just have to get that ability to tune into the radio signal. Well, that sounds all very nice metaphorically, but the tuning in is the hard part. It's quite easy to do it like with a radio with a little turner button, but to do that with your mind is another question. So she became ridiculed for that. And of course, when you write hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages, I mean, she sort of just did channeling writing, right? It's not like she had fact checkers going through everything. So, that left her open to some criticism. But, I still have great deal of appreciation for what those people brought to the openness that Blavatsky, Alcott, Annie Besant, Alice Bailey, these people brought to our Western civilization. And it benefited me a lot because my mom liked them, and so brought a lot of Indian books and Chinese books, in English language, translations, into the house in which I was born. And so in my teen years, I could read the Tao Te Ching, the Bhagavad Gita. My mom, if dad wasn't home for entertainment, because my dad was always a very entertaining guy. So if he wasn't home to entertain, she'd bring up the Tao Te Ching or one of her texts that she likes a lot and read of a verse or two and say, "Isn't that nice? Can you imagine? There are people who think that you can have a beautiful verse like that out of the Tao Te Ching, and still you're going to go to hell if you don't believe in Christ." And that was thanks to Blavatsky, that kind of attitude. And of course, she was a very strong Christian, and she lived and died a Church of England lady, and was very enthusiastic about, the idea of going to the Christian heaven and all of that. And hopefully she did. Although when she died, I did have a Buddhist poa practice down to send her to Tushita, which is close to the Christian heaven. Yeah, so with Kalachakra, I think, obviously, we know more now because more has been written, but still, Kalachakra is kind of an unexplored Tantra. We have probably around the Tibetan Buddhist centers around the world, we probably have 100,000 Westerners practicing other Cakrasaṃvara or Vajra Yogini. Probably almost as many practicing Yamateka, highest Yoga Tantra. Probably only 5,000 or 10,000 practicing Guhyasamāja. And we have hundreds of thousands receive Kalachakra initiation, but only a few hundred doing the actual practice, maybe less, a few dozen.
Why so few?
Well, because in the Tibetan world, the refugees who came into exile were mainly practicing mainstream, and that's in 1959 when they came into exile. And then every school became very strong because back in Tibet, 6,500 monasteries, temples were all destroyed. Now, many of the big monasteries had a minimum of 5 Trasangs departments. And one of them would be the Dukor, the Kalachakra department. And one would be the Membe Tratsang, the medicine department. And the others would be for the other main studies of their monastery or training. But when they came into exile, mostly Kargyupas were teaching Shenrazi and Cakrasaṃvara or Vajravarahi. And almost no Kargyupas taught any Kalachakra because those masters who were enthusiastic about it either didn't make it out. The ones who did make it out wanted to be sure that the staple diet of their school was preserved. Now, don't forget, some monasteries, 10,000 people in that monastery, maybe 10 or 15 people made it out. And they're living like refugees in India on peanuts, literally on peanuts, and a little bit of rice and dal thrown in for nutrition. So they basically immersed themselves in, after the conference of 1963 with Dalai Lama in Dharamsala, when the heads of all schools came and the high lamas who had escaped came, and they sort of set up a plan to reopen. They knew they weren't going to be going back to Tibet soon, and they knew that in Tibet, everything had been, all 6,500 monasteries razed to the ground. And 13 weren't razed to the ground, but they were converted into military warehouses, and their libraries and all of that all destroyed, and not to mention zero tolerance for the traditional education or training. And so Dalai Lama and the heads of the other schools tried to identify, is there one Lama here who knows blah, blah, blah? Okay, we're gonna find you $5,000 and you have to go to blah, blah, blah and open a school, and we'll try and find 10 or 15 kids that you can train. And what about da-da-da? Okay, we'll find you hold that and we'll give you, we'll come up with $10,000 and you should go to blah, 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 open a school and start doing a training. It was kind of organized systematically like that. Randomly, systematically, by who they knew was in India. And once it started, it sort of developed a life of its own. And so back in Tibet, the Sakyas held some Kalachakra lineages, but none of their great Kalachakra masters escaped. So it wasn't really included in the Sakya training in India. And the Jonangpa had held a strong tradition of Kalachakra, but no high Jonangpa lamas made it out to India. So for a while, that looked like it was iffy. Fortunately, in Amdo, some Jonangpa lamas secretly managed to survive in the prison up near Labrang Tashi Kil for the 22 or 23 years. And so when they came out, they were able to reestablish. And Jonangpa sort of became Kalachakra sort of became a little bit of their thing at that time, because everyone else was doing the other things Jonangpa had done. Now, the Dalai Lama and Kalachakra was special, and in about the early 1700s, Kalachakra had almost disappeared as a strong practice in Tibet. And the seventh Dalai Lama had his root guru, Ngawang Chokden, the first Reting Rinpoche, travel around and gather all the existing Kalachakra lineages and sort of package them together as one. And so within Gelugpa, we had the Sakya lineages, the Jonangpa lineages, and so on, the other lineages. And so that existed. So that did come into exile with Ling Rinpoche and with Dalai Lama. Dalai Lama, I think, received it in Tibet from Kungsar Dorje Chang, great, who I include his Guru Yoga method for Kalachakra that was given out in the 73 and 76 initiations. So then it wasn't until maybe 35 years later that the Tibetans felt somewhat settled on having reestablished their traditions. And so now everyone's looking at, well, we did have some Kalachakra lineages there. Whatever happened to them and where are they now? And they're fishing around for, lamas who held those lineages, and now they're reviving them. But in the beginning, if you came into India as a Gelugpa, they were really pushing you to do the Shungchen, the 5 great treatises, so become a Geshe and then do Sangde Jigsom, the 3 main father, mother, and non-dual Tantra practices. And if you're Sakya, mainly doing the Kempo training, and again, the 5 or 10 treatises, and do He Vajra, Cakrasaṃvara, and the Lamtre tradition. Nyingmas, they want you to do Vajrakilya and some Dzogchen and goodness knows what else, because each of the different Nyingma centers in Tibet had slightly their own formula, you could say. There was no one Nyingma school in Tibet. Nyingma school just meant everything before 1000 AD. And so they were never really very consistent in what they did within the different ones. They're almost like individual sects or schools, you could say. So for that reason, Kalachakra became a bit weak. But because I think the 7th Dalai Lama had been very important in saving it, he had this sense after being in exile for 10 years or so that it should be some more attention should be given to it. So he started giving it. And then he likes he's a bit of a peacenik at heart, Dalai Lama, bit of a peacenik, if I do say so myself. He likes this idea of 1,000 years of golden age. So he thought giving this worldwide will be very beneficial and will help usher in the 1,000 years of golden age.
Thank you very much. This has been fascinating. Whereabouts can people sign up to your Kalachakra cycle that you're teaching, as well as the other online trainings that you're offering?
Well, I do quite a few different ones with different countries. And right now, Vajra Mandala, which is out of Europe with Jonas and Gosha, are running the 12-week Kalachakra. We've done 2 weeks. So we did the Jainam, the simple Jainam for the first one, and gone through the little Guru Yoga text, which was given out by at the Dalai Lama's 73 and 76 initiations. So people are doing that, and we'll start a little bit on the Sada in the weeks to come, and then some of the completion stage. Otherwise, in Russia, I'm doing a course on the Mahasiddha lineage of Avalokiteshvara for Dream Yoga, Poa, Bardo Yoga, and so forth. Argentina, I'm just finishing off the 6 yogas of Naropa. So the only way people can really find out about them is collect good karma, lots of merits, and keep your eyes on the stars and the ears, listenings for the songs of the dakinis coming through the winds of the tree, rustling of the trees.
Lama Glenn Mullin, thank you very much.
Well, thank you again, Steve. Bye-bye for now. Ciao.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.